Hello and welcome to Landon Live. My name is Landon Harvey, and today we have on comedian and ventriloquist Glenn Pearce. Glenn, how are you doing tonight?
Very well, thank you very much, Landon. How are you? And thanks for having us on the show today.
Oh, well, thank you for being a part of it. We're looking forward to it. So let's just get into it. How did you get into ventriloquism?
Well, my background's a little bit different from a lot of people that start in ventriloquism. A lot of people start by getting a doll, I guess, when they're fairly young, and then learning how to do ventriloquism by listening to Jimmy Nelson's record or Paul Winchell or whatever. My entry into ventriloquism was quite different, though. I was a late starter. I've only been doing it about 14 years. About 2006, I started doing ventriloquism. I was doing puppetry a bit before that. But I was a university professor in marketing. My background was in education, and I had a doctorate in helping people learn through drama, educational drama. And I actually taught a university subject called New Frontiers in Marketing, which was a subject that looked at contemporary issues in marketing, new developments, controversial products, green marketing, ethics in marketing, all the sorts of things that are quite current today, of course.
Sure.
And I taught that unit. It was a drama-based unit based on my doctoral work. And each week the students would do a 3-hour drama workshop. And I would teach through drama conventions or drama techniques, things like the words like still imaging, voices in the head, mimed activity, forum theatre, and puppetry was one of those. And initially what I did, I had the students do their own puppetry, and I got them to create a puppetry story by reflecting on what they'd learnt in the subject that semester. And it was pretty basic stuff. It was giving them paper bags and some coloured textures where they created these puppets, and they could use whatever characters they wanted based on any, cartoon program, whether it be the Flintstones, South Park, Simpsons or whatever. So they actually would create these terrific puppetry shows reflecting on what they'd learnt. And a lot of stuff that was coming out was showing them that they were learning a lot through the drama, which was a very powerful medium because it was engaging their emotions. So I actually, in 2005 I went to a puppetry festival in the Blue Mountains, which is in the west of Sydney. And in conjunction with the festival, there was a puppetry conference, and it was put on by a New South Wales Puppetry Association. It's a bit of a long story, this, but I'm getting to how I got to ventriloquism.
Yeah, no, I love this. This is fascinating.
And thanks. And so I went to this puppetry conference, and it was an incredible experience because there were puppeteers from film, from television, people working on science fiction movies using puppetry in those. TV, there were some educators there that were involved in puppetry. And they had a session in the conference where you could actually talk about what you'd done in puppetry. And there was a little bit of an education stream. So I just got up and talked about what I did in the drama-based subject by getting the students to use puppetry to reflect on what they learned. And the puppeteers were absolutely amazed. They thought it was incredible. And that was it was quite encouraging, really, to see professional puppeteers appreciating what was being done in teaching business subjects using puppetry. And as it happens, there was a dealer there who was a local toy retailer who had the license for Folk Manners puppets. And I saw a presentation for kids with cancer, and they had basically human puppets. And they were the puppets where you could put your arm inside the puppet and use gestures. And they did. Sorry?
The live hand puppets where they
live hand puppet, yeah. And they did a performance, Landon, and it was quite moving. And I thought I might be able to use something like this in the drama-based subject. So the dealer had some Folk Manners puppets, and I ordered a puppet from him. And I called him Lance, and I've actually got him here. I'll show you him in a second.
Oh, yeah.
And I started off then, that was 2005, I started a new drama convention where I brought Lance into the classroom as as a CEO who was giving all marketing consultancy teams a briefing to build a new island on on the coast of Queensland. So they were in team marketing teams, and they had to attend the briefing. The client was this puppet Marcus Bear, I called him, based on a newspaper report about something being proposed like this, a new development on an island, a resort. Anyway, I'd actually bring Lance out, and I'd be under the desk, and I'd be operating him under the desk, and he would be answering the questions. He would be giving the briefing and so on. And of course, I could use the gestures with the arm to scratch his nose, or wave his hand, or brush his hair, or whatever it was. And it was interesting. We did some research on this, and the students thought he was very demanding, very rude, very aggressive, and it was all human qualities. So they suspended their disbelief and believed that Lance was a real corporate client. And we did this because I wanted to give them some exposure to what it was like in the real world to be actually working for someone who was quite demanding and had, very exacting standards and so on. So I did this with Lance, and I found it was incredibly tiring to be under a desk and to be operating Lance.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, I had a new appreciation for puppeteers because you'd perspire.
Oh my
It
God.
was very, very demanding.
Mhm.
And anyway, so I thought, I'll show him in a second, but I thought after I'd gone through that puppetry, I thought if I could possibly stand alongside a character and do ventriloquism, I wouldn't have to be under a desk, and I wouldn't have all this associated stress and so on. I think it'd be more convincing and give me more flexibility in reacting to the character, and it would broaden their possibilities of doing it. So that initial work with Lance as a puppet then got me to start learning ventriloquism. This was in 2006. I did the Maya course. I read books. I looked at videos. I did whatever I could to learn, and I also met Chris Kirby then. But let me just show you Lance. He's a very rudimentary puppet. As I say, he's retired, and I think I actually used to use my own voice when I was doing the puppetry. So I'll just show you him. But he's a great little guy, and there he is. You're retired now, aren't you? Yes, and he's glad, aren't you? So there he is. So, and that was the arm. You could put your arm into the puppet, and so that little guy started it all. And incredibly, he actually helped me win a lot of awards, teaching awards for innovation in education. So from a very humble beginning, that little guy helped me in lots of ways to get recognised for innovation in using puppetry and for experimenting in using some new techniques in the classroom.
What I think is interesting is by having that puppet, your audience is able to see how the qualities that make the character and analyze that versus having to dissect it from some other means. And it's really an interesting medium to teach with as a tool.
It was, and we did some research with the students. We actually published a paper, and it got published in a education management journal, and it had a real story to tell about how they really embraced the character and the whole scenario. One from there, I guess, in what happened in 2006, I was learning ventriloquism. I did some performances, and we had a very famous ventriloquist. We've had a couple of really great ventriloquists in Australia, people like Clifford Guest. We've got Darren Carr now, of course, one of the all-time greats. Chris Kirby, Ron Blaskett. We've had some really wonderful ventriloquists. And at the time in 2006, I thought, I grew up watching Chris Kirby on television. Yeah. And I didn't know Darren then, but I thought I'll try to contact Chris Kirby. And of course, he was an Ed Sullivan vent. The guy had his own variety show like Letterman at one stage in Sydney. He did Royal Command performances, whole range of things. Very clever guy, a great performer, great writer as well. So I contacted him, and at that time I'd ordered my first ventriloquist figure, and I'd
Oh, neat.
ordered a figure from Tim Cowles,
Mhm.
and so I was awaiting his delivery, and I made contact with Chris, and anyway, he very kindly said, "Well, look, come over and we'll have a chat." I said I was interested in learning ventriloquism, told him what I did. I worked at the university and so on. Anyway, I went over. I remember going over to North Sydney and met him for the first time, and he was so kind, and he was an early mentor for me, and we became very close friends. He he never he had some bad experiences in meeting people who were supposedly interested in ventriloquism. He
Yeah.
told the story once of when I first met him. He said, "Well, I met a fellow once, and he wanted to chat to me about ventriloquism, and I met him in a restaurant, and he produced this horrible doll, and he started doing this routine with the doll, but he made no attempt to control his lips at all." And
Oh,
Chris
man.
interrupted him. He said, "Look, excuse me." He said, "You're doing ventriloquism, but you're not. Your lips are moving. You're making no attempt." And the fellow said, "Look, don't worry about that." He's telling Chris Kirby, an all-time great. He said, "Don't worry about that, because when I'm operating the doll, they don't look at me. They just look at the doll." So Chris was a bit wary in meeting people after
That's
those sort of
hilarious.
experiences. But look,
Oh,
we
man.
became very good friends, and
Oh,
he died he died in 2016. I knew him for about 10 years, and
yeah.
a great guy, very, very talented. And yeah, that's how I got going. And I
So
showed him the figure that Tim bought for me, and that went from there, really.
I'm curious, having your experience in the classroom with puppetry and then getting to talk to him and hearing his experiences and learning from him, how did that shift the way you saw ventriloquism as a performance art?
Well, look, I guess it made me, having the contact with Chris made me think
Mhm.
about a whole range of things. About
Okay.
he was a stickler for great technique.
Mhm.
So if you're going to do this sort of thing in the classroom, you've got to do it properly. And he was a great writer too. He was always focusing on writing.
Yes.
Had to be relevant for the audience. So in the classroom, the material that you were working with the student had to be relevant to them, and the technique had to be there. And
Mhm.
of course, you had to be funny too. You had to incorporate
Sure.
comedy into it. And this is one of Darren's strong points. Darren Carr is always saying it must be funny. And Jeff Dunham, similarly, a lot
Mhm.
of Vents are saying this. So I guess that, that early contact with Chris really shaped what I did. And then I started using ventriloquism to do special presentations. I'd bring the Tim Coles figure into the classroom, again, being guided by some of Chris's ideas, bring
Sure.
him into the classroom, and he would play the role of, say, an incompetent customer service manager when I was teaching services marketing. So, and of course, the students love that sort of thing. I remember telling the students about an unfortunate bus ride I had on the Gold Coast in Queensland, and I encountered a terrible customer service manager, and I told them the story. And then about a week later, I said, "You know that customer service manager from the bus company?" And they said, "Yeah, in class." They said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, he's going to be in class next week. He's coming down, and we're going to have a debate." And of course, they were anxiously looking forward to this guy. And of course, it turned
Uh,
out to be my ventriloquist
that is
figure. And
genius. That is hilarious.
they just loved it. Yeah.
That must have been a
So,
priceless reaction when you pulled them out.
well, it was. And I remember walking over to the class, some of the students, they said, "Has he turned up tonight? Is he there?" And I said, "Yeah, he's there waiting." They said, we can't wait for this. This is going to be fireworks." So yeah, they got a surprise, and they
So
really enjoyed it.
did they know that you had been practicing your ventriloquism up to that point, or not anything? Wow, so this was totally new to them.
Totally new.
Wow.
So when I went out of the room, I said, "Look, he's just waiting outside. I'll go and bring him in." I came in with the puppet and had him on the stand. And of course, they
Yeah.
just reacted. So, yeah.
That's phenomenal. Well, I'm curious, aside from ventriloquism, have you done anything else in comedy?
Yeah, well, look, I've always been interested in comedy.
Mhm.
For a time there, I wrote some comedy for Sydney radio,
Okay.
and I was doing some little sketches and some impressions. I do voice impressions of some politicians and so on,
Okay.
entertainers at the time. So I
Mhm.
did that for a while, but I always grew up, um, you know, liking comedy. I was the guy in the final year of school for our muck up day performance. I was the guy who wrote the script, for that show. So I was always interested in writing comedy, and I used to do a lot of corporate presentations, and always try to incorporate elements of theatre and also comedy into those performances. I always saw teaching as a performance, and I tried to incorporate elements of comedy, visual aids, good production values. I used to actually start one subject each year as a marketing communication subject, and each year I'd start with a piece of business theatre, which was a play we'd basically put on. I'd get some of the students from the drama-based class to help me. And we did a whole range of themes. We did Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh, neat.
We did a heavy metal bikey thing one year. We did James Bond. We do these things as a piece of business theatre just to, captivate the students, to get their attention. So
Sure.
I think a lot of this stuff, Landon, puppetry, ventriloquism is a wonderful medium for communications.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Um, I'm curious, how did writing for the, you said you wrote for the Sydney Radio. How did writing comedy for the Sydney Radio differ from maybe how you write comedy today for your act?
Well, I guess I was back then. I was focusing on characters, but they were more send-ups of politicians and
Mm,
doing impressions. So
okay,
I was focusing on impressions, but still there was the character angle there with the puppetry, the ventriloquism, the character, and then doing the comedy with the characters that I was sending up or having a bit of fun with.
mhm,
But I was also trying to be quite topical back then, picking up on things in the news, and I still try to do that with the vent figures. I try to pick up on topical things that are going on when I'm working with an audience. I do a lot of research when I'm doing shows with an audience, and I try to pick up on topical things. Sometimes they don't last very long. The topics burn out very quickly, but
sure.
I try to capitalize on fresh things that are going on. And as I say, it's a lot of work because you've got to keep customizing
Hmm.
things and tailoring things, changing things. I think I
Sure.
spend too much time customizing shows, doing audience research. I spend too much time doing that, to be honest. But I think they do appreciate it.
Yeah, it's like you end up perfecting this topical joke, and then by the time it's perfected, you can't use it because it's not relevant anymore.
That's right. There's a very
Yeah.
very short shelf life on these things. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, earlier you had mentioned Darren Clarke. Can you talk about a little bit about how you two met and your friendship? Because it's really neat.
Yeah, well, look, Darren's a great mate, and
Mm.
he's helped me enormously. I met him years ago when I was in an audience. He was performing at a show. It was a private function in the Blue Mountains again,
Oh,
at an art gallery, the Norman Lindsay Gallery, and he was doing a birthday party for a friend, and I sat in there, and that's when I first met Darren. But I was watching his shows
mm,
on at clubs, and of course he did Australia's Got Talent.
yes.
Uh, so I first got to know him then, but Darren's an incredible performer. I've learnt so much from him, and he's been so generous helping me.
Mhm.
He's probably the best corporate entertainer I've ever seen. The way he can
Yeah.
work a corporate group is just. I've sat in on. He's taken me to some of his shows
Mhm.
for some clients, and to sit in and watch him, it's just a masterclass. I mean, the way he can respond to people, he can modify his act depending on the audience and the circumstances. Um, just a brilliant comedian. He's got so many gags. I mean, he's just like a joke machine. You mentioned a topic, and he's got a joke for that particular
Mhm.
topic. But a very clever guy. He's a musician, very talented musician, a singer, plays guitar, bass, a whole range of instruments.
Do you
And he's a
guys
great
ever
builder too.
do you guys ever bounce ideas off of each other, like
Well,
for
we do
character and for
actually, and
joke?
look, it's particularly during this lockdown. We don't live that far from each other, so it's been good. I'll pop in and we can bounce ideas. We had a
Mm.
session the other day, just freewheeling, bouncing jokes and topics, and
Mhm.
and that's great for me. And I think it's probably good for him too, just to have some,
Sure.
someone to bounce some ideas off. And
Hmm.
he's, as I say, he's made so many suggestions. He's helped me with writing, and he's done repairs and dressed some of my characters. He's very good at building
Yeah.
puppets as well. He's built that new lookalike of himself, Darryl.
Yeah, he
So
showed it to us in our interview. It's phenomenal.
yeah, look, he's probably he's too modest. He's a great builder, and he can repair anything,
Yeah.
props and so on. And we had we were planning a big trip to Van Haven this year. Unfortunately, it was cancelled, but yeah, I was looking forward to that. But we do bounce ideas off each other,
Hmm.
and I think you need that, because
Yeah.
I think two heads are better than one, and he's much more experienced and better than
Sure.
I am as a ventriloquist. But it's been great having that association with him.
I bet. And it's always nice to have a different, whether it's on a character or a joke or the way something's brought up. It's always great to have another mind, another look at it, because sometimes you'll be thinking one direction, and Darren might help you out, or you might help out Darren and think a totally other, and it might not. It might help spark something else and it just creates this growth of an idea and
Oh,
an
that's true.
inspiration.
Yeah, that's
So,
true. And I think it's much better. I think it's much better writing with someone else and getting some input. I mean, I'll write a gag, and Darren can help me refine it. With his experience and knowing what works,
mhm.
and um, and that's a great way to work. To have someone like that of that class, world class, close by, is able to help. He's been a great mentor for me, actually,
Yeah.
like Chris was. Yeah.
And Darren just commented. He said, "Finally, this is interesting." Now, I'm sure that anyone that follows you on Facebook, and you're in some of the event groups as well, is that correct?
Yep.
The ventriloquist
Yep.
groups, yeah. They've seen photos of your new character. So, you've developed this brand new character. What is his name and what is he?
Well, the new character is
Mm.
he's a voodoo doll, and his name is Kirk Effigy, Voodoo Child. And I'll show him to you in a second. How he came about was quite
Adorable.
interesting, because, again, it's a little bit unconventional, a bit like my story into ventriloquism. Won't be as long though, Darren, this one. Um, what happened about 2 years ago, I got sick, and we still don't know why. I've never been a drinker. I've never taken drugs. I played sport. I ate healthy. I looked after myself. I never smoked in my life or anything like that. And suddenly I got really bad heart electrical problems. This was 2 years ago. And I had about 3 problems, and they've fixed them basically, but wasn't too good there for a while. And I was lying in hospital, and a mate of mine came over to see me, a guy called Phil Love, I work with at the uni. He said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Well,
Mhm.
I feel like someone's got a voodoo doll and they're sticking pins in my heart." And when I said that to him, I thought, hold on, I haven't seen anyone with a voodoo doll. And
Yeah.
I thought, what if? So I, I had to think about it, had a look, and looked at some design,
Sure.
came up with some designs and an idea.
Mhm.
And I came up with a design, and the design that I had, I went to Marianne Taylor.
Mhm.
I've had him more than a year. I haven't launched him yet, still working on his voice.
Mhm.
We've been working on his character for more than 12 months,
Sure.
his background, his bio. And
That is so important that you mentioned that, and thank you. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because Tom Crowell on the Learn Ventriloquism course talks about the character background and the character bio. Can you talk about why it's worth putting in the work and why that plays such an important role in writing for the character?
well, I think it's critically important, because you've got to know that character to be able to work with them. And I think you only know that character by thinking through
Okay.
their quirks, their idiosyncrasies, their characteristics,
Hmm.
their origins. I think once you know all that, the comedic material can flow, the dialogue can flow from that. But I think unless you know that, it makes it very hard to develop the character, work with the character. So I like to spend a lot of time. I have bios on all the characters
Mhm.
about their relos and their preferences and so on. I think, Tom, I agree with Tom on that. It's such an important thing. I know Jeff Dunham too is very strong on this, to have characters and knowing their background and so on. So
Mhm.
I wanted to get this guy right because he is very unusual.
Sure.
And in fact, at the time, I told Darren. I only told a couple of people in confidence about it, and I
Mhm.
told Darren, and I told Mark Wade. And
Okay.
Mark Wade said, "That's a brilliant idea. I've never seen a voodoo doll." And
Yeah.
for Mark to say that, I mean, someone like Mark, who's been around and seen it all, done it all,
Yeah.
for Mark to say that was very encouraging as well. So here he is. It's Clarke Effigy. He's
Sure.
a
We'll make
Generation
you
Z.
we'll make you large screen here. There we go.
Okay.
Now I'm
Interesting. Now,
curious, Glenn, did you do the original designs for the character, and how many times did you have to draw it or have it drawn till it fit how you feel the character should look?
well, I played around with different designs. I had a few drawings myself, and I
Okay.
looked on the internet for some figures of voodoo dolls, and I came up with an image that I thought would work, and I modified that, made some modifications to that image, and this is what we basically came up with. So this is Clarke Effigy. He doesn't wear his heart on his sleeve. He wears his heart on his chest there, and so there he is. So we didn't want to
Hilarious.
make him too creepy, and Mary Ann and Melissa have done a fantastic
Yes,
job on this guy,
they
and
did.
so there's his feet. Just
You know, I mean, he hasn't even spoken a word yet, and he has that kind of essence, where he's creepy, but he could be potentially lovable as a character in your show, and
and
I love that.
that's why I think it was important, Landon, that we spent so much time on developing the character so that the true character shone through, and he
Yeah,
wasn't he didn't come across as a creepy, ghoulish type character.
right.
He's more of a Generation Z. I know that Jeff's got Earl, who's a sort of a new age troll type on his phone.
Yeah,
This guy we originally worked, and Darren and I spent a lot of time thinking and working on this guy, thinking about his background, and we thought that, as a Gen Zer, he's come out to Australia. He's been adopted by our family, and he's at university currently, studying online. So
so does
there he
he
is.
belong? Does he have? I mean, is he your voodoo doll, or is there any? Is that still in the works on who we find out he's connected to in the act?
Yeah, well, the story we've come up with so far is that I first came across him when I was on a Caribbean cruise,
Okay.
and I did a very expensive, overpriced, in fact, shore excursion to his maker's premises, a
Uh-huh.
stall on Voodoo Island.
Okay.
And since then, he's emigrated to Australia, and he's joined me now, and that's that's the story so far.
That's great.
So yeah, it was just something I picked up on a Caribbean cruise, unfortunately.
Yeah. I love
But
the design on his mouth too, because it looks as if his mouth isn't going to open, and then that shock when his mouth does open is even funnier.
yeah, well, look, again, Melissa and Marianne were
Mhm.
true to the design, where we had this. I wanted the mouth. We wanted to be a smiling type mouth,
Mm,
and that's what they've done. They've really produced
yeah.
that effect. He's exactly the same as the model that we sent them, and he's turned out really great. We put some Darren put some eyebrows on him, just to break up a little bit of space on his forehead,
Mm,
and Darren helped me with just some white in his eyes too, just to add a little bit more life to the eyes, because normally voodoo dolls would just have buttons as eyes, but
right.
I think the white highlights just make
Yeah,
it look a
it
little
gives it a
different.
good area to focus on if he's talking to someone in the audience or to you. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's Clarke Effigy, Voodoo Child. So I've
That's
done a little
phenomenal.
video.
Mm,
I've done a little movie, iMovie, um, in the launch. As I say, I haven't really launched him. It was really just a preview to show him the other day, and yeah, the reaction's been great, and I appreciate your encouraging comments as an expert figure builder too.
Oh
Thank
yeah,
you.
oh yeah. It's always I'm always I had opened Facebook on, and I was just scrolling through, and I had seen him, and I was scrolling at a rapid pace, and I had to scroll back because I was like, it catches your eye, and it's just a great character design, and I can't wait to see what you do with it, and I'm sure our viewers can either.
Well,
Many events.
I'm glad he's so different because I mean, I think we've got to try to come up with new characters and new
Sure.
ideas. Try to be original, and he's something that I hadn't seen before, and I wanted to have something quite unique, and I think he provides it. We're looking forward to doing some things with him. As I said, there were a few shows that were coming up. I was doing a big charity show in Sydney. I think it was about 700 people or something like that, and I was going to use him in that show. Unfortunately, it got cancelled because of what's going on, but
Yeah.
there'll be opportunities to use him, I'm sure. So I'm looking forward to that.
That's phenomenal. Many events have an old man character, but yours is actually a 3,000-year-old Egyptian mummy, King Tutankhamun. How did this character come to be? Because this is
Well,
we're on the
again,
other
I've
character.
always been a bit like Nick Paulo.
Mm,
I saw Nick's interview the other day, and Nick's always been a great fan of horror movies, and
yeah.
I always loved the Mummy movies, the early Mummy movies, not so much the
Mm,
later ones, but the early ones in the 60s and so on. I always loved those, the Mummy's Revenge, the Mummy's Hand, and all that. So I always wanted a mummy figure, and when I was teaching services marketing at the university, my idea was to use a museum scenario as a basis of a case study where we could talk about services marketing concepts. And
okay.
I decided to use the mummy in some online videos about the project and about recapping on some content that had been covered in the lecture the week before and so on. So I was able to bring him in on that sort of museum scenario in services marketing, and to
Sure.
have him do some online stuff. And I contacted Dan Pays a number of years ago, and I said to Dan, I want a mummy. And Dan built him for me. He was a custom design,
Oh,
and he turned out really, really well. And I've got him here. I can just show him to you if I
oh yeah,
can.
that'd be great.
I'll see if I can bring him in.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Dan Pay's characters. He built some really exaggerated and cartoony stuff.
And there is King Tutankhamun.
Hello, Sonny. Who's this?
It's Landon live.
Hello, Mr. Laws.
Hello, thank you for being a part of this. I know you were probably sleeping or dead or whatever, partially
Yes.
alive state you were in, but thank you for being a part of this.
No, I was in the sarcophagus, thank you,
Oh,
Mr. Laws. Yes. If you asked me.
Yeah. Now you're an expert on history, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. All right. Well, what was Ramses the First responsible for?
Ramses the Second.
Oh dear. I think you better go.
Toodaloo. Bye for now. Cheerio, everybody. Bye-bye, Landon.
All right, bye-bye. Thank you for being a part of
Bye-bye.
this.
There he is. So that's King. Everyone's heard of King Tutankhamun. Well, that's
Mhm.
King Tutankhamun. So I call him Tooters for short. He's been in the theatre show we did, the Hello Dolly show, and
Mhm.
audiences like him because he's a sort of a kindly old guy. A lot of people, as you say, a lot of people have got old man characters, but I thought I'll have a really, really old man, 3,000-year-old. So
Yeah. Well, I've seen a lot of it. I'm sure people that are friends with you on Facebook have also seen a lot of this other character that is a flight attendant. Can you talk a little bit about her and where the inspiration for that character in your act came to be?
well, again, that's Vanessa Good to Go, the flight attendant for Koala Airlines here in Australia.
Okay.
Um, and Mary Ann Taylor and Melissa again built Vanessa for me a number of years ago. She's an audience favourite. A lot of the seniors, I do a lot of senior shows and retirement villages and so on, may absolutely love her. She's a bit of a maniser. She usually takes a fancy to one of the gentlemen in the room. She came about because I was taking my wife, Prizzy. She was going back to see her family overseas, and we were at Sydney Airport, and she was about to get on the plane. She was flying back to Indonesia. Originally, she was from Indonesia, and Prizzy said to me, "You haven't got a female character. What about a female flight attendant?" And I thought, well, what a great idea. I haven't got a female. I should have a female character. I don't know why I didn't have one at the time, but I didn't have the right character. And when Prizzy made this suggestion, I thought, let's get one done. Well, she'll be a blonde bombshell. And Mary Ann and Melissa made her for me. And yeah, she's a great character. So sometimes I dress up as a zany captain called Captain Groper, and we'll do a double act together. I've done a couple of little things, just photos on Facebook for that. But yeah, as I say,
those are hilarious. The photos you post are just great.
She's a beautiful figure. As I say, they do a wonderful job, Matt, and people love her.
But I love that you'll also dress up as a character. Like with Nick Paulo and with Dan Satchoff, we talked about, acting as a ventriloquist and, embodying a character and then having the puppet, and how that creates a whole different dynamic than the typical straight man or straight woman with a puppet. So that's neat that you do that as well sometimes.
Well, again, I think it's people like Nick Paulo and Dan Satchoff who've inspired people like myself to try that, to do that. And I think that's what we've got to do, to push the boundaries. I love some of the things that both those guys do in creating characters in the acting. I did an acting course when I was doing my doctorate. I was doing using the drama in teaching. So I think the acting's such an important part. And I think doing ventriloquism, I think I like to use the math acronym. It's the manipulation, it's the acting, it's the technique with voice control, and it's the humour, being funny. I think that math acronym is really, and the A, of course, is an important part of that.
Yeah, that's great. What is your process for developing characters?
Usually I try to think, again, with audiences, a character that would be appropriate for the sort of audience I work with. And I try to come up with characters that are a little bit different. I try to come up with characters that are likable, that the audiences would take to. I don't go and buy a puppet and then try to fit the character around it. I try to think about the sort of character I'd like to develop, and then get the puppet made. I've only bought one puppet. It was a folk Manus dinosaur, by buying the puppet and then thinking about what I could do with it. And I haven't really been able to use that puppet. But yeah, usually the process is think about the character, think about the audience, what would be appropriate, what don't I have, where would it fit into the show, and then to develop that character, get it made, get the right voice for it. I try to have different voices for all the characters, and even if it's playing around with accents or tone or whatever, I do try to have a different voice. And I've got quite a few characters now, so it sort of stretches you a little bit to keep coming. That's why with the Voodoo Doll, I wanted to come up with something that was quite distinctive in terms of a sound.
Yeah, that's great. I'm looking to see at the comments here. We have Mark Silver said, "Great, informative, and interesting interview. Thank you. I'm glad that you are enjoying it."
Well, thank you very much.
I'm curious, Glenn, what is your main audience that you perform for? Because you talked about knowing your audience when you create a character.
Well, I do a lot of work. I do a lot of work with seniors. I've done a lot of work with aged care, and with some of the aged care centres, I'll do an hour. And sometimes that, it's quite demanding because there's a range of cognitive abilities in some of those audiences. I've worked with purely dementia groups, and that's a tough ask, but it's better when there's a range of cognitive ability and some people there that are reasonably sharp, that can get the gags and can help with the timing and so on. So I've done a lot with retirement villages, aged care, but I've done other things as well. I've done christenings. I've done done some weddings. I've done some corporate things. I did a corporate thing towards the end of last year for a big super company. But that's, Darren's the corporate guy. He's really focused in that area. I'm not at that flying at that altitude.
Mhm.
But when I was at the uni, I'd do things like corporate roasts. If someone was leaving, we'd do a bit of a send up. But I did the theatre show is the Hello Dollies is something that I'm particularly proud of as a show. And I did, towards the end of last year, I did a special presentation night for harness racing. And again, I tailored all the characters. The horse was an imported American trotter, and he spoke to the audience. I had Vanessa represented the sponsorship of harness racing, and I had Eddie, my first vent figure. He was dressed up in a set of racing silks, and he was one of the up-and-coming young drivers. So again, customised. So a range of things. I'll do whatever I can, and hopefully things will open up later on. But it's a bit hard at the moment because there's no cruise ships. Clubs are aren't doing much at the moment.
Right.
And so it's a matter of looking to do what you can. Darren was saying that lounge room shows have been a big outlet for particularly a lot of some of the musicians are doing lounge room shows. So I don't know what the future of that is for event performers to do that sort of thing, but it's a possibility.
I love, you mentioned taking your characters and not just customizing the material, but customizing the way the character is dressed to fit the venue. And I love that because I don't think people realize how much that allows them to open new doors to creativity and to also deliver a unique experience to their client. And Darren and yourself are the only people I've ever talked to that have done that I know of. So it's a neat thing.
Well, Darren's doing some really fantastic things. He's got some new characters, and the way he's dressed them and attired them, the props and the accessories, and the way they're going to interact with those things. I mean, it's just out of this world. So, he's going to be introducing those in some new shows. He's been doing a new photo shoot featuring some of those characters. But that's one thing I've learned from Darren. When we went to the shoot the other day at his place, he turned his whole house into a professional photographic studio to do the shoot. And the thing is that he even redressed some of my figures. He said, "Look, let's go for a different look. Let's think about the character." And he redressed them, and he puts a lot of thinking into that area, into how they look and how that appearance and the costume, the clothing and the props, how it relates to the character. Sure. And I think that's I think that's such a vital thing to think about. In fact, Tudors is wearing a pair of underpants. If I can show you. And the basis of that, when we did the theatre show in Dorrigo, one of the major players in the drama group that was in the audience up there, he'd been in a play recently just wearing his own underpants. That's all he wore on stage. So in his character. Oh wow! And I actually wrote some gags around the underpants and dressed Tudors in the underpants. They've since stayed on him because they just sort of break up the mummy's bandages look. Sure. But again, that's an example, I guess. Things I've learned from Darren to be able to customise and to appeal the audience and use props that add to the whole illusion of things.
How do you approach your show? I mean, is it kind of raunchy, but you can kind of pull it back, or do you go for more of a family friendly approach? What's your mindset when you approach your show?
Landon, I always try to do I work family friendly. My philosophy has always been I imagine my mother is sitting in the front row,
Mhm.
of the audience. So
Yes.
I always work. I always work clean. I remember Chris Kirby once. He said to me, "Don't use expletives because once you start to go down that track, you know it's you can lose some people, and it's probably
Right.
best if you don't." A lot of new age comedians use swear words and so on, and I'm not a great fan of that.
Yeah.
So I try to work very clean, family friendly. I try to have interaction where I can. I like to build in interaction. Again, people like Darren Carr are masters at this. But I try to do that. And again, try to customize shows, keep them relevant,
Mhm.
and the funny. Try to make it funny. I think
Yeah.
in the past I may have focused a little bit too much on character and some of the acting, but the
Mhm.
funny. I think the funny has to be the feature. It really has to.
I'm curious, where do you find comedy and the funny merge with the character? Because you talked earlier about creating that character profile, and you talked about making sure it's funny. Are there things like when you're doing research on, mummies, that you're able to tie in the research to aspects of the comedy, or how do you integrate those?
Yeah, I have actually, and I'll watch TV programs. The other night on television, there was a show about secrets of the pyramids, and I'll say to my wife, "I'm going to watch this because I might get some angles
Yeah.
for some comedy, or angles for some ideas for lines,
Hmm.
topics." Sometimes I'll go up and for the mummy, I'll read about pharaohs and about ancient Egypt, looking for points of interest and historical facts that you might be able to turn into a gag.
Hmm.
Trying to find any gags on mummies that you can actually change and use,
Yeah.
customize for yourself, or give you ideas about other gags. So
Hmm.
I do a lot of that to try to come up with something a bit original.
Wow. That's truly neat. I love that. It's always neat to see the process on how people come up with a character, and what is the foundation for that. So it's neat to hear your perspective on that. Um, when did you attend your first Vent Haven Ventriloquist convention, and what was that experience like for you?
Oh yeah, well, I went to my first convention in 2008
Okay.
at the old drawbridge,
Hmm.
the old
Yeah.
drawbridge inn, and I I loved the drawbridge. And originally, I thought it was a bit hokey and a bit run down, but I thought that was deliberate because I
Yeah.
thought they were trying to play on the hokey nature of
Of
some of
the
the
ventriloquism.
ventriloquism.
Yeah. That's
And
funny.
I went in 2008, and look, it was one of the most enjoyable experiences I've ever had. The people that I met, I mean, people that you'd watched on TV and on DVD, learning the ventriloquism
Yes.
course, the Mayor course with Mark Wade, because you
Hmm.
go there and Mark's the executive director, Mark and Jody Wade, and then I remember the time Ventriloquist Week with David Letterman. I wish they could bring
Yes.
something like that back on
That was
tonight
fun.
shows.
Mm.
Seeing Dan Horn. I mean, you're watching Dan Horn doing this
Oh yeah.
cutting edge performance on Letterman, and then Dan Horn's running workshops. Dan Horn's giving a performance.
Yeah.
There at Vent Haven was just unbelievable, and it really opened my eyes, and to meet these people, and the list of people there: Ken Groves, the Alan Seamocks, Pete Michaels, Bob Isaacs, and characters like Bob Abdu,
Hmm.
Bob Rumba, Jay Johnson, Razor J, all these people, Jeff Dunham, Tom Ladshaw, the list goes on. Dale Brown and Steve O, Al Gatler, all these people. Lisa from the convention, from the museum, and so on. To
Yes.
meet all these people and to be able to interact with them, and to learn so much. I mean, the workshops, and my advice to anyone watching that hasn't been to the convention is try to get there
Hmm.
next time it's on, because it's such a learning experience, and being able to go to that museum. I mean, I wish I lived closer
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah.
to every time I go there, you just want to spend more time there. And
Hmm.
even the dealers' rooms, it was like I was like a kid in a toy shop.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and it was just, just a fantastic experience, and I learned so much. And every time I go, I haven't been for a few years yet. I got sick. Mark asked me to do some a couple of years ago, and I was unwell with my heart, and then he put me on the program this year, and I was really looking forward to that. We had something special planned, and something that was going to be theatrical and funny, hopefully. So I'm hoping to get there again. But it's just such a great experience, and a wonderful environment. It's a bit like a family reunion going back. You know what it's like.
Yeah.
You've performed there.
Super
I've
friendly,
seen
yeah.
your wonderful performances there, and
Oh, thank you.
yeah, just a great event. Just fantastic.
I
And the
love.
work that they.
Mhm. I was just gonna say I love the convention. It's always you talked about the dealers' rooms, how many ideas you can get from whether you buy a puppet or not. Seeing all these different artists and their work, and getting to play around, and having friends that are ventriloquists there with you as you try stuff out. It's such a neat dynamic and such a fun thing. So
Yeah, and I mean the friendships that you make, with the likes of Dale Brown and Tom Crowell and all these
mhm,
people. Razor Jay's a good mate of mine in Wisconsin. The
yes,
friendships that you have, you can continue this contact with them now on Facebook or by email or whatever.
mhm.
And Alan Seamock was a wonderful person. He built two of his two figures for me.
Oh wow,
Um, he built Kingsley Allgood, the virtuous work experience student that I've got. He actually spoke at my wedding. He helped me deliver the speech at my wedding,
wow,
Kingsley Allgood. And I've got another little figure that Alan bought. Such, just wonderful people, and would never have made those contacts had it not been through the convention.
yeah. Wow, what's your favorite part of the convention? Is there one thing that stands out when you think about it, or?
Well, I love the workshops, and
Okay.
because they always inspire you. And I was looking forward this year to the workshops, particularly Dan Satchoff's
Yes.
workshop with his acting work. I mean, a
Mhm.
wonderful actor.
Yes.
Um, and I enjoy the workshops. I enjoy the shows. I like some of the open mic events
Mhm.
as well, late into the night. But
Yeah, Bob Rumba
just
always does a great job with those.
oh yeah. Well, the
Mhm.
hosts, the compares, whether it be Bob Rumba or Dale Brown or I said Bob Rumba, Dale Brown, Bob Isaacson, really great
Yeah, Al
compares.
Gettler sometimes, yeah,
Al
is
Gettler,
yeah.
yeah. Can I mention Al and Dale in the same line or not?
You can,
Great
but you have to
guys,
be careful.
great guys.
They are indeed. I'm curious, what advice do you have for new ventriloquists? People that are new to the art and want to learn about it, and where
Well,
do they start?
I
What's your advice?
I think I'd recommend that people work on technique,
Okay.
get the technique right, and there's so many great ways to learn now through video. Tom Crowell's got his course. The Maya, I did the Maya Studios course with Clinton Detweiler.
Yes.
So I think for people to concentrate, learn technique, learn good technique.
Mhm.
Um, Chris Kirby, when I started with Chris, Chris taught me he had a very special technique in lip control where he actually says the words. He actually says the letters B, P, W, etc. So he taught me that technique, and he was a really hard taskmaster. If your lips moved, that wasn't good.
Yeah.
And so I think to be disciplined, to focus on your breathing, your technique. Um, I think being funny is again a theme that Jeff Dunham and Darren Carr push all the time. You've got to be funny. If it's ventriloquism without humour,
Mhm.
there's something lacking. I think the manipulation. Tooters is just jumping off the chair next to me. That's all. Um, it's it's about the manipulation to making them come alive, and I think the acting side of things, be able to act and react. And
Yeah.
Alan Seamock, he ran a workshop a few years back at the convention, And that was really enlightening too, because focusing on your reactions to the puppet. I like Dan Satchoff made a point about listening to the puppet. I thought that was really fascinating during your interview with Dan, when
Yes.
he talked about listening to what the puppet's saying and then reacting to what the puppet's saying as if it were a real person. So but I think technique, again, I come back, work on your lip control, work on your technique, keep the puppet alive, be funny, manipulate them so that they are a living person.
I've always found it interesting how when you learn in these tiers where you, if you learn, properly, hopefully it's the lip placement first and the technical side of the ventriloquism. Then you're, on to creating the character. Then comedy becomes important, and then you're looking over your act and you're making sure that your relationship with the puppet looks good and the manipulation of the puppet. Everything looks good. The puppet's well dressed, like what you said earlier. You look comfortable on stage. There's so many aspects, and that's what I love about this art is that you can never fully perfect it. So there's always room for improvement. There's always room to add new things, to take out, to alter bits, alter characters, just try new things and bounce ideas off of friends and family members. I'm curious, wrapping up here, what do you hope to see from the future of ventriloquism and from future ventriloquists?
Well, I'd love to see, again, younger people coming into ventriloquism, and I think you've been a great role model in what you've done with your broadcasts and with
Thank you.
your puppet making, and you're a great technician, a great comedian, a great ventriloquist. I think people like yourself and Jeff Goltz,
Yes.
and there's other people coming through, Hannah Leskovsky, a great performer, and I don't want to mention too many names because I don't want to leave people out, but
Sure.
I'd love to see more young people coming through. I'd love to see more originality and creativity, and not relying on hackneyed jokes.
Right.
To try to be original, to try to be as creative as possible. I'd love to see more venues opening up. I'd like to see a bit of variety. Love to see variety shows in some format make a comeback somewhere, somehow, to give Vents more opportunities to perform. So I guess there's I think there are opportunities and great potential in the future with people coming through, and again, I think I'd like to see people sort of be more critical of their own performances too. I try to do that. I'm looking at myself on video and going, I don't like that, and I've got to change that. I've got to improve that. So for people to continually strive for self-improvement, to continue to develop, I think that's something I'd love to see people achieve, both personally and professionally.
We have a comment here from Gina Meter. She says, "How about old people coming in? What advice do you have to them? What do you hope to see from them? Older people getting into ventriloquism."
Well, I'd encourage people of any age, older people. I mean, I've only been doing it for 14 years, so I really picked up, even though I loved ventriloquism as a kid. I've only been doing it for the last under 15 years. So I've had people ask me, can you start it when you're a bit older? And I say, definitely. It's never too late to start. And I'd encourage those people, because those people bring new ideas and a world of experience, a depth of experience, life experience that they can draw on in comedy and portraying characters and so on. So I'd certainly encourage older people to use ventriloquism, to get into ventriloquism. We see a lot of them at the convention, people that are red dotters, they're starting out, and it's something that was been a dream. So pursue your dreams, do it, because the more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well spoken, well spoken. I love that. Thank you, and thank you, so much for spending your time and sharing your story and inspiring all these new events coming into the art. Glenn, we've had it's been a pleasure having you on the show, and I hope to do it again soon in the future.
Well, thank you very much, Landon. Really great to be on your show. It's a great honor. Thank you very much for having me, and all the best to our viewers. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you guys real soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers.